Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
The viewpoints expressed in this program are the opinions of the people expressing them and are not necessarily those of Fresh Air Incorporated, its staff, or its board of directors.
Hi, this is Al McFarlane, host of The Conversation with Al McFarlane. You're listening to 90.3 FM, KFAI, Minneapolis. I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to The Conversation with Al McFarlane. I'm glad to be here. Glad to have you along as well. Thank you for listening and supporting this important work on KFAI. Thank you for connecting with us across the various social media platforms. We'd love for you to like and share and be a member of our YouTube community at Insight News MN on YouTube. Before we get going today, I want to thank all of the KFAI radio broadcast listeners and our online supporters for helping make our fall membership drive a success. We raised $65,000 over the past 2 weeks, and it just lets us know that you are committed, you are supportive, and we thank you for supporting and donating and volunteering, to make this station, this work go forward. So thank you so very, very much. You can still donate. You can give online at kfai.org, and we still have some awesome gifts available for your support and for your contribution. Also, we want to connect with you on this program. If you're on the radio or if you're on one of the social media platforms, send a post out, a tweet out, letting people know that we're live right now. Invite them to join the conversation. If you want to add your voice to the conversation, you can do that by, if you clicked in or tuned in on Facebook or on LinkedIn or on YouTube, just go to the comment section and add your voice. Your voice matters. Every voice matters. Our voices matter. Add your voice to today's conversation or suggest things that we should cover in the future. We want to engage in ways that make sense to you. So do that, and we appreciate you. Today's program, as always, we promise to deliver robust conversation. That's our forte, is engagement that matters, that makes a difference. And we've got some exciting guests in the studio today to deliver that to you. I want to begin by shouting out and bringing in one of my dear friends and leaders in community, Linda Sloan. She is the principal over at the Council for Minnesotans of African Heritage, and she's brought two of our team members along as well. Linda, good afternoon. Welcome to the conversation. You've got some exciting stuff coming up this weekend, October 4th. But first of all, let's give people a CMAH, Council on Minnesotans of African Heritage 101. Reintroduce
101.
Right.
Well, thank you, Al. Just so excited to be here. You're my favorite, so I finally got back on the show. So excited to be here again. We're the Council for Minnesotans of African Heritage, finally known as SEMA. We've been around since 1980, doing some amazing work. But we were known as the Council for Black Minnesotans, and our name was changed about 10 years ago to be more inclusive so that we can cover the entire African diaspora. So whether you're an African immigrant, African American, whether you're from the Caribbean, it doesn't matter. Anyone who claims to be from Africa who is considered Black is part of our constituency. So what we do, basically, we are here. Our vision is to make sure that there's an inclusive, vibrant African heritage population where we are celebrated, we are valued, we are loved, and people understand that, hey, we are here and we have made some significant contributions to this country. We do that also by ensuring that people understand that, hey, we need to receive the benefits of everything that the state of Minnesota has to offer. Do it primarily through policy. We are nonpartisan, and we do have that direct connection to the legislative body and to the governor. So, hey, if you got a bill or whatever you have, if you want to just talk about issues, which we have issue groups coming up, but we won't talk about that today. But if you believe in policy change, if you believe that we do matter, if you want to provide a future for your children, for your children's children, please contact us.
Let me say that, Linda, I so appreciate the work of the council. I happen to have been a member of the directors of the council when it was the previous named Council on Black Minnesotans, and served actually as a chairman of that body for a period of years. It was a great organization, and it remains a great organization. One of the people joining us today is a former leader as well, and that's Brother Justin Terrell. He'll be on in a minute. But I, as you were speaking, it reminded me in today's topic, this leads us into it, of in the, I think, early 90s, I was visiting in Moscow and had a chance to do some presentations there, and presented not only as an editor of Insight News, but in my role as the chair of the Council on Black Minnesotans. And one of the things I learned about what was happening in Russia at the time, this was at the time of the fall of the Soviet Empire and the emergence of the new Russia and the separate nations. But I met with some people who were not white, that were Asian, that were Russians, but they defined themselves as members of small nations. And the discussions stuck in my mind because at one level or another, African people in America, not only are we Americans, and rightfully and proudly so, but we are Africans, and we're Africans in America. I have used the term in describing myself as a New World African, Africans in the New World. So all of that resonates. Well, let's bring in, why don't you introduce your team members, and let's have them talk about Saturday's event.
Okay, sure. I'd like to introduce you actually to Theo Rose first. He is our managing policy director. So when you heard about the child welfare law, African American, it's a long title. He was instrumental in helping get that passed. And then the man of the hour is actually our community engagement director, Momaja Lansana, and he goes by MJ. And he is the individual who is spearheading the event that's happening on Saturday. And as you can see, we got African immigrants, African Americans, we are resembling what we're speaking about. So I don't know if you want to turn it over to MJ.
Well, and our style, our format is we're all in community together talking. So just jump in where you want to jump in. But yes, let's bring MJ in. MJ, first of all, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
You as well. So this issue of, put up the flyer first of all. Let me do that so that we keep people aware. You've got a project this Saturday called Bridging the Gap, Shared Roots, Diverse Journey. And uniting African immigrants and African Americans in Minnesota. It's this Saturday, October 4th, from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. at North Point Health and Wellness. That's 1256 Penn Avenue North, corner Plymouth and Penn. We call it the Thor Building in the community here. And so we're inviting everybody to show up and to learn and to contribute. But what's the mission? What's the vision? I've got some thoughts that I want to share, but let me hear from you first of all. The origination of this concept. What's the goal of today's or Saturday's meeting?
Well, thank you all again once more. Usually I get interviews and go on programs. I don't have the support of my executive director and my managing policy director around. So I'm sure today will be a better day for me because I now have a support cast just in case I stumble. Now. And when I'm out there doing engagements to folks, the biggest concern that our community members have, both African American and African immigrants, is the differences. And as our executive director rightly said, we are a policy organization. And our job is so complex. Let's take for example if we're working on housing and then COVID hit, we are just going to move on to health at that point because healthcare is a priority. When we're doing that, maybe George Floyd happens. Now we are moving on to police brutality, safety of our community members. So because it's so complex, we cannot afford to be working in division. This program is inspired by our community members because they want it to happen. Our goal is to bring our community together because that's the only way we can fight for them policy wise. And even within the African American community, there are different groups there. When you talk about African immigrants, one country as a whole, like Ethiopia, they have Oromos. It's so complex the constituents that we're dealing with, and because we are non-political, and our goal is to work with everyone of African descent. It's very imperative that they are together. That's what inspired this program that's coming up on Saturday.
So, what are the challenges? Why is there a need to have a discussion that identifies and elevates specific voices of African Americans and African immigrants? There must be an issue that we are addressing. What is it?
Well, there has been long history of disconnects. Cultural is the big differences right there. I'll get in an example. If you are talking to some African immigrants, they might presume or assume that African Americans are aggressive or lazy, and that is not true. In reality, we have a lot of progressive African Americans out there. We have a peace-loving African Americans out there. In fact, majority of them are peace-loving African American. In every community that you go, whether it's you're white, black, or race, there has to be bad apples because that's why we have governments. But the concept that they are lazy or they are not progressive or they're aggressive, it's not true, and it's just a myth. Now you switch the coin on the other side. When you go to African Americans, they might presume that African immigrants come to this country, they get everything for free. Every one of us know that African immigrants work 2, 3, 4, 5 jobs. In fact, that's the reason why they don't really get involved in policy work because they work so much hours, right? So the bottom line is we have to sit back in the round table as a family, discuss these differences, go back into different groups, talk about solution, and come back and see how we can forge ahead. So that is really why we have this event going on Saturday because it's very important. Especially at a time like this, with what's going on out there, we cannot afford to work in division at all.
And so, where do these narratives originate? That's the question. I heard you say two things. One is that there is an articulated gulf or perception of African Americans that many immigrants have about African Americans. So the question is, where does it come from? How does that image materialize in the mind and the experience of the African immigrants? And then there also is this idea, because we have the emergence of this concept of ADOS, organizing around the interest of the formerly enslaved, called FBA, Foundational Black Americans, as opposed to the immigrant African community. So there's one fault line between and dividing us as a people. Where, from your point of view, and Theo, you can jump in here too, do the narratives originate? Why do they exist? And how critically important is it that we dismantle, destroy, and eliminate these perceptions that keep us divided and keep us from pursuing an integrated approach to our future, the future of Black people in this country, the future of African people on the planet Earth? MJ, what do you think?
So I was in Sierra Leone since I was 5 to 16. One of the things that we when you're in Africa, you assume is that immediately you come to the United States, you're rich. That's the assumption, right? So it's just what people grown to see. The television will show a different side of United States. They're not going to show the project, the hood, when all those things bad happens, or a guy standing under the bridge begging. All they see in the movies in Hollywood is the good stuff. So people presume that automatically when you come to America you're wealthy until they come to realize the real hard fact that no, it's not the case. Some of us live from paycheck to paycheck. So these are just the narrative that has been settle right across that cause that perception. Folks think in Africa, what do you see? You see animals, dirty stuff out there, but it's not true. They have cities like America, they have McDonald's, they have KFC, and all this stuff. So it's just what the TV, the narratives of the television have presumably set the stage. Now, when you're in here, they don't celebrate Black communities as often as they're supposed to be. What you see is the killing of one another. So the typical African immigrants, when they come, they just see that's the picture they see about the African Americans, and it become a perception, right? And then the African Americans, for instance, they themselves, it's just a narrative that people come here, they are Somali, they don't speak English, they are wondering, how do you even pass the interview question? I mean, I met a gentleman that asked me, if somebody is a Somali that doesn't speak English, how did they went through the interview question? And my response is, that's why we have translators, right? They don't expect that just because you want to come to the United States, you know English. You're gonna learn it. In fact, that's one of the biggest challenges of immigrants, that we have to sympathize with them for. So this is just a narrative of what they want us to believe, and luckily we have a meeting on Saturday. We're gonna find out more. That question is gonna be spilled out like an onion. We're gonna find out the problem, the issues from the roots, and then we can solve that. And I have Theo here, who is a policy person. He has a big experience when it comes to the history of both communities. He can pitch in as well, But I hope I answered your question.
Theo, jump in. Policy is something that I do want to get into, and the question is, the reality reflects policies of our nation. Policy reflects philosophy, and so look back to the source of disinformation and the strategy of disunity, or of the marginalization of people of color in general, Black people, Africans in particular. Where does that policy come from? And when we look at that, what are we what's required of us to shift policies that are detrimental to not only our experience and our future, but in the long run, to the experience or to the future of the entire country? What do you think, Theo?
Yes, sir. Well, I wanted to say first and foremost, thank you, Al, for having us on. And I love these conversations with you and the wisdom that you bring to this. It's a really important question, right? I mean, what's the source of these types of tensions in our communities? And we have them in the contemporary sense right now, in the contemporary moment, but they also, there's a history of this, right? Just like how there's a history of struggle against it, and we have a long tradition, right? Long traditions, plural, of struggle against these divisions that are harmful to us. But I think, in MJ's answer, and even at the root of your question, you have that first thing that he said about the perception that Africans have of the United States. And that's coming from a particular socioeconomic standpoint, right? Within a world economy, right? Where you see the United States as basically a kind of heavenly kingdom, and there's not a lot of other information that you get. And the information that you get is been shaped by those who have power over you. So I think the issues around structural racism and how we think about structural racism, the scale of it, the geography of it. I mean, we in the modern age in particular, we have to broaden our view of that and really think about it from a transnational or a more global perspective, right? And especially because we are here together. I mean, there are Black people in Minnesota. The land. The joke used to be, are there Black people in Minnesota, right? But there are Black people in Minnesota from all over the world, right? And our task as a council is really how we work together, how we come together. And it's crucial. It is absolutely crucial with all that's going on that we do come together, that we find ways to learn more about each other, that we understand that our differences are the resources for our health and our wealth. I mean, that's a key thing. Our differences really are in any modern economy right now, difference is the key to innovation. Right. But for sure, in our own traditions, the differences that we bring, we have a tradition of inclusivity, right? right? In terms of the African tradition, the welcome nature of the African tradition, and that Black folks come from in the long term. So I think that those are, thinking about your question there is, we have to address our differences, but then your question really also lays root to the fact that there are common challenges that we face in the contemporary and also historically, that should actually be the source of our strengths.
Listen, thank you so much. What a great conversation. In the future, I want to have us do sort of a case study conversation on what fascinates me, and that is the work of the leader of Burkina Faso, Captain Ibrahim Traore.
Yes.
And he's all over social media,
Yes.
and a lot of fictionalizing stories about, what if he had this conversation with the Pope or with the president. But I think that's important. It's kind of fitting in my mind into the concept of what Afrofuturism is about. And the AI experts coming out of Africa are posing scenarios with solutions that make you feel good and let you see things differently regarding the power equation between Africans, its resources, and its capacity to project its own future for itself and also as a player in the world stage as well. We'll come back to that. MJ, make the invitation, or invite people to come Saturday again.
Well, my folks out there, listening to us today, this is very important events. We are bridging the gap. It's going to happen at North Points. Free parking is provided for you. Light refreshments. Come engage with real folks, build long-lasting relationships. But most importantly, come be part of history, because this is history making. We are going to discuss as one family, and I always like to bring my story into this. For somebody who was born here, my parents brought me back to Sierra Leone when I was 5. I went to high school there. I came back. I have an accent. When I go back to Africa, immediately they know that I was born in the United States. I'm called African American, right? But when I come here, because I have a direct link to parents from Africa, they call me African immigrant. Now, where do I stand in all this? One people will call me African American, the others will call me African immigrant. Simply because of my accent, right? Or because of my name. So what if I was called Michael Jordan or Michael Johnson? And what if I was raised by African American parents? Maybe I was adopted, then automatically I become an African American, right? So some of us growing up in this generation, we want to see this issue addressed. I've engaged with folks in the universities. This is very important and pressing events that's coming up. So I encourage all of us to be there. It's 11 to 4. Trust me, that time goes by just like this. We've done this before. You even know how fast that time will go by. But we want you to be on board. Thank God we have a director who is willing to work with staff within the council, council members, our appointed or chairman for the council window is also on board supporting this event to happen. So please, my folks out there, if you're African American, you're African immigrant, even if you're a white person listening to us today, you have your neighbors, your friends, your co-workers who are of African descent. Urge them to come, because guess what? When your neighbor does well, we all do better, right? So these onions is on all of us to make sure we play our part. Thank you.
Thank you, and look forward to seeing you and get reports on the important discussions. So that's going to be great. Let me. My next guest is an author. You guys hang out as long as you're able to. Just hang out with me here. But Professor Marion Orr is joining us, and along with him, I brought in Justin Terrell, who was formerly your colleague in the council. Justin, first of all, hi, Brother Justin, good to see you. And Marion Orr, let me introduce you. Political scientist, professor, author of The House of Diggs, The Rise and Fall of America's Most Consequential Black Congressman, Charles C. Diggs Jr., a book that highlights the overlooked legacies in Black political history and their impact today. And Justin, before I bring in Professor Orr, comments on the previous conversation. You led the council. What do you think?
Al, thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity. I want to just say shout out to Linda for doing a great job providing leadership to that organization. As many can imagine, it's a struggle being in proximity to power and trying to operate a representative body for African Americans and African immigrants across the state. I think what they're doing is, this is a request that was often brought in front of the board when I was the executive director, and so it's great to see that you're honoring this the desires of folks in the community who want to have this conversation. I think it's smart to be responsive and to create and hold space to have this conversation. So hats off.
Awesome. Professor Orr, good afternoon and welcome to the conversation. How you doing, sir?
Well, I'm doing well. Thank you. Thank you for having me on your show.
Well, thank you for being here. Feel free to comment on anything we said before, number one. Feel free to talk about your book, your work. That's why you're here in part. But also anything else on your mind in public affairs going on presently. Don't pass up the opportunity to make comment, to make recommendations, or offer criticism of situations that we are experiencing as a community. But let me ask you first to talk about the book, House of Diggs, The Rise and Fall of America's Most Consequential Black Congressman, Charles C. Diggs, Jr. What's the book about, and who was Congressman Charles C. Diggs, Jr.?
Yeah. Well, the book was published last week by the University of North Carolina Press. It's a biography, a cradle to grave account of the life of Congressman Charles C. Diggs, Jr. Congressman Diggs represented Detroit in the United States House from 1955 to 1980. And as the subtitle of the book lay out, I document in the House of Diggs that the congressman was perhaps the most consequential of all the Black members who've served in the U.S. House. I would argue that Diggs' legacy and achievements and accomplishments are such that he would rank high among all members who've served in the United States Congress. He came to Congress in 1955, and one of the first things he did as a 32-year-old new congressman was to go down to Sumner, Mississippi, where the trial of the two white men who admitted later on to murdering Emmett Till was taking place. Diggs was, in fact, the highest ranking federal official, the only federal official to observe the trial. And what I've learned in my research, that he had a tremendous impact while he was there. He was there for 5 days throughout the entire trial. And what I've learned is that many of the Black witnesses who came forward to testify and to point an accusing finger at the two men who killed Emmett Till, that they gained strength and encouragement, they told others, because of Congressman Diggs' presence. That is, seeing a Black congressman sitting in the courtroom supporting Emmett Till's mother, for example, gave these witnesses the courage to come forward to accuse these two white men. And that was something brave to do in the 1950s in Mississippi. And let me add very quickly, in that Diggs' presence as a new Congress member, as a Black congressman, his presence at the trial, I believe, elevated the media attention around the trial. So he early on, very early on, made a huge statement about his career in Congress. By going to Mississippi and observing that trial, he was saying to America that although I was elected to represent Detroit, I plan to be a congressman who represents all of America. And that's what he did for about 25 years in Congress. He was consequential in that he was the author of the legislation that brought and restored home rule back to Washington, D.C. Many of your viewers and listeners may not be aware that prior to 1973, the President of the United States of America appointed public officials like the mayor in the District of Columbia. That's because Congress has a exclusive constitutional authority over the district.
Mm-hmm.
But many years ago, right before the Civil War, that used to be home rule. But after the Civil War, after Reconstruction, and after many more Black people moved to the district, the Congress and the national government pulled home rule away. So no local democracy in Washington, D.C. until Congressman Diggs in 1973 pushed through the Congress the self-home rule bill that now governs much of Washington, D.C. And let me add very quickly, Diggs was the founder of the Congressional Black Caucus, the founder of the caucus. He was his first chair of the caucus, and he was the one who brought the originally 6 members together to form what would become the Congressional Black Caucus. Diggs' greatest legacy, however, I must say, must be in Southern Africa. Diggs was the Congress member who brought to America's attention what was happening in Southern Africa. Most Americans in the 1950s, 60s, indeed the 1970s had no idea of apartheid. But Diggs became a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee in 1959, and he immediately began to focus on Africa, and he became the first legislator in America to take a long-term interest in African policy. I argue in my book that the anti-apartheid movement in this country literally started in Congressman Diggs' congressional office. He was a remarkable American, unfortunately, almost forgotten.
Well, not only that, pilloried towards the end of his career. What happened to his career? What happened to him?
Well, the subtitle of the book is The Rise and Fall, and I spend many chapters talking about the rise, explaining to people the accomplishments that this man laid out for us and his legacy. Diggs got into financial troubles. He had a difficult time managing his own finances, and in 1978, in October of 1978, he was convicted by a federal jury in Washington, D.C. A jury of 11 blacks and 1 white found him guilty on 29 counts of mail fraud related to a payroll kickback scheme that he was involved with. And then Diggs would eventually be censored by the Congress, resign from Congress, and then spend 7 months in federal prison because of the payroll violation. He had a huge fall. Many people remember the fall, but I must say a lot of folk don't remember the wonderful legacy that this man left behind. And I lay this out in House of Diggs in a very comprehensive way, based largely on archival data. Congressman Diggs left his congressional papers at Howard University. He left some 750 boxes. He was a remarkable American leader. And my book attempts to allow people to see the full person, and not just the fall, but also the rise of this great American leader.
Did you know him personally? Had you met him at all in your lifetime?
Oh, no, I never met him. The congressman died in August of 1998. I was born and raised in Savannah, Georgia. I learned about him. When I was an undergraduate student at a small, historically Black college called Savannah State College. My professor, Haynes Walton Jr., was a brilliant political scientist, perhaps one of the leading political scientists of his era. And when he taught political science at Savannah State, Congressman Diggs came up often in many of his courses. So I knew about the congressman since I was about 18, 19 years old. And when I went on to get my PhD in political science, I learned still more about Diggs and learned that no book had been published on him. And I decided to take the plunge. It took me 11 years, but it was a wonderful experience writing about this remarkable American.
So two things. One, did you know my friend Floyd Adams in Savannah?
Of course, yes, I did. Yes, Mr. Adams was our first Black mayor. His family owned the Black newspaper there, the Herald. Yes, I know him very well.
He and I were close friends, but by our mutual association with the Black Press of America, the National Newspaper Publishers Association.
Yes.
But I can share with you my Charles Diggs memory, because as I am listening to you, I'm going back to my growing up in Kansas City, Missouri, and somewhere in me is a memory that there was a building on Prospect Avenue that was called the Charles Diggs Insurance Agency. Does that sound right to you? Was he in the insurance business too, or do you know?
Yeah. Well, his father, let me just say this very quickly. The House of Diggs, the title of the book, is taken from the name of the huge mortuary business that the Diggs family owned from the 1920s until the late 1960s. The funeral home was called the House of Diggs, and it was located in Detroit, Michigan. At one point, the House of Diggs had a burial insurance program. And in the 1950s, that burial insurance program merged with an organization, I believe it was in Kansas City or Louisville of some sort. But they had been involved in the burial insurance business, but it was not called the Diggs Insurance.
Okay, we're having a little bit of difficulty with the bandwidth. Justin, jump in if you can hear me. Any comments or feedback? One of the things I wanted to ask you, Brother Orr, Professor Orr, was about the pattern of the destruction of careers. Some of it at our own making, but some of it orchestrated from outside. And I think that there is a history of targeting Black people, Black leaders that eroded our capacity to make significant, sustainable gains in the political world. Justin, what do you think? And then Professor Orr, maybe you'd comment more about that as well, Dr. Orr. Justin, what do you think?
Yeah, I had the same question, also along the lines of like, how do we apply these lessons to today, where we see that we have bulletproof politicians whose conduct openly is, to be polite, questionable, and to be honest, damaging, and embarrassing. And so, Dr. Orr, I'm excited I'm in the process of purchasing your book online right now. So I'm excited to dig in and learn more about a leader that we should be all be familiar with. But I do think that there is something to be said for the effectiveness of always being able to make sure that the last chapter in a Black leader's life is the chapter that that denigrates their legacy, right? Like what is lived on from what this Black man has done outweighs 29 charges versus the 34 our current president has. and we're talking about a legacy of DC having more liberty in how they govern themselves. Obviously, there's an active DC campaign for DC to become a state, DC statehood. We see the legacy in what he did for civil rights and whatnot. And I'm reading some of his quotes online, and the encouragement that he gave to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. during the Montgomery bus boycott, even this is a legacy that needs to be uplifted, because like really what I want to ask you is, do we have any more Congressman Diggs left? Like, where do we look to find a Congressman Diggs? Because you have someone who fought tooth and nail, fought like relentlessly for the liberation of our people. And I'm not sure that I see that in our politicians today. Frankly, it's pretty dangerous for them to fight. And I think the intimidation works, and how do we muster the courage of our ancestors, like what Congressman Diggs effectively led? And shout out to the Congressional Black
And before you answer,
it's their convening right now, right?
Doctor, or before you answer, Theo, you had a variation of the same question. What was your take on the same topic for Dr. Orr?
Yeah, no, I mean, I second all the stuff that Justin just said, and thank you, Dr. Orr, for bringing this wisdom forward to us. I mean, we to go back to what our council is trying to push forward. We are in an attention economy, right? I mean, knowledge economy, and so it's really important that we really control where we put our attention. And so I think that elevating this type of a legacy of the late Representative Diggs, like that's really important for us to be doing. And my when I was also looking up this particular subject, the issue of his criticism or his campaign against apartheid or his leadership in that came up, and you mentioned that in the latter part of your of your comments, and I wonder, I mean, just to follow up on Justin's question, like what you think about that component as well, like the idea that Black liberation has to be focused on the Black experience here in the United States, but then there's also our connections to Black folks overseas, right? And the struggles overseas as well. And so he has that. We can draw also from that legacy as well.
Yeah. Well, those are all very good observations and questions about Congressman Diggs and his legacy. I'll say a couple of things in reference to the current Congressional Black Caucus, which is now, some 62 members strong. I was at the convention this past weekend. One of the things that's important to understand about Congressman Diggs is that when he came to Congress, and for a good many years, many people saw him as a strong, independent Black man. They knew of the House of Diggs Funeral Home, which was at one point one of the largest Black mortuary businesses in the country. In fact, the Diggs family at one point buried more than half of the Black people in the state of Michigan. If you died in Detroit, or you were likely to be buried by the House of Diggs. So what I'm trying to say is, I believe when the congressman arrives to Congress in 1955, and throughout much of his career, many people had the impression, incorrectly, that he was a man of wealth. And what they did not know, that the House of Diggs was crumbling as Diggs, he was the only child, and there's no one was there to watch the business. So what I'm saying is, I believe Diggs was able to speak out on issues because he was not beholden to any money interests at all. He did not take large contributions from the auto industry. He did not take large contributions from labor, because he really never had any opposition in his 24, almost 25 years of office. So I think there's something to be said about that independence. And I wonder the extent to which our current members, have that kind of independence. The other piece I would say is that many of the Black members of Congress, especially the more senior ones now, are now part of the party leadership. And when you become part of the party leadership, there's certain things you must do and have to do because you are part of the party leadership. So I think there's a number of factors going on here, but I would emphasize that Diggs was, first of all, a race man, and he was considered to be an independent person because of this perception that he was a man of wealth because of the House of Diggs reputation.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to make the point about Africa here because Diggs' family has deep, long roots of interest that goes back to Africa. Let me explain. Mm-hmm. Diggs' grandfather, a man named James Diggs, graduated from what is now Jackson State. He was in the first graduating class of what is now Jackson State. And he became a Baptist preacher, and he went to Liberia as a missionary. Okay? And this experience influenced James Diggs tremendously. It influenced James Diggs so much that he named his son Charles Coles Diggs, and that's the Congressman's father. My point is, the middle name, Coles, C-O-L-E-S, was taken from the last name of America's greatest Black missionary at the time, missionary to Africa, a man named John Coles. So Diggs' interest in Africa goes back generations, quite frankly. And so when he arrives to Congress and he goes to Africa for the independence celebration of Ghana, he's blown away by what he saw in Ghana and came back to the U.S., told the leadership in Congress he wanted to shift his committee membership to the Foreign Affairs Committee. And quickly, let me say that in 1969, Diggs became chair of the Subcommittee on Africa. And when you become chair of a subcommittee, you're able to do certain things. And what this young man did was to awaken America about what was happening in Southern Africa, in particular, what was happening in South Africa.
Amazing. I'm Al McFarlane. This is The Conversation with Al McFarlane. So you've been listening to my guest, Dr. Professor Marion E. Orr. He's an American political scientist. He's currently the Frederick Lippitt Professor of Public Policy and a Professor of Political Science and Urban Studies at Brown University. And he specialized in education reform in the United States, also in urban politics, Latino politics, and African American politics. As he mentioned, he received his undergraduate education from Savannah State College with a BA in political science in 1984. He then studied political science at Atlanta University with a master's degree in political science in 87, followed by a PhD in government and politics at the University of Maryland in 1992. In 1992, he became a presidential postdoctoral fellow at University of California, Berkeley. And in 1993, he joined the faculty of Duke University. He moved to Brown University in 1999. Let me say that he's also the author or editor of 8 books, solo author of the 1999 book, Black Social Capital, The Politics of School Reform in Baltimore from 1986 to 1998. And in that book, he applies a theory of social capital to the topic of education reform in the U.S. using Baltimore as a basis for the case study. A lot of important work. Dr. Orr, thank you so much for being here. I wanted to focus on the conversation about Africa and Diggs in Africa and where we are today as you see it. Here's how I see it. I think that we are emerging, breaking free from narratives that structurally and intentionally keep Black people and other immigrant populations at a disadvantage. A system that has enabled other immigrants, primarily European, but sometimes other people of color, to ascend a perceived ladder towards the prosperity that MJ talked about, that people at home in Africa or anywhere around the world envision when they think about America and as a land of opportunity. But what we're discovering is systems that advantage wealthy and that are extractive, exploitative, and that use policies and practices of political, cultural, religious, and military might to protect and grow the interests of the few at the cost of fulfillment and the human dignity of the many. Where are we now as you see it? And I want you to say that in the context of the groundbreaking work that Congressman Diggs did in bringing apartheid and its injustice to the attention of the world, and that being a turning point that led to the elimination of apartheid at some point in time. All that relates to us in our common, ordinary lives here and now, I believe. What do you think?
Well, one of the one of the things that Congressman Diggs really espoused was the notion of Pan-Africanism. And he made a strong statement at the African Liberation Day movement in 1972, where he said that our freedoms did not stop at the water's edge, that we had to be concerned about freedom around the world. So he often looked at our situation and put it into a much global context. Let me say that Congressman Diggs would turn over in his grave to know that we've granted refugee status for white South Africans, for example, under this current administration. I think he would be really concerned by the extent to which China and not the U.S. is playing an increasingly important role in Africa. I listened to a Senate committee recently, and I watched Cory Booker ask about the U.S. current involvement in Africa, and he expressed strong concerns that we were, not grasping and seeing the great vitality and possibilities that exist in Africa. And so in many ways, I see that we still have a long ways to go in this regard. But let me say, Congressman Diggs was one of the people who really tried to make this connection and to make it clear at a very high level in our U.S. government.
And so to MJ's concern and the topic of bridging the gap this Saturday in the program by SEMA, Council of Minnesotans of African Heritage, where do we stand right now? One of your areas of expertise is Latin American history and culture. What I know is that broadly, African Americans don't really think a lot about Africans in the Caribbean or Africans in Latin America, that there are probably more Africans in the Western Hemisphere that speak Portuguese and Spanish than there are who speak English, meaning more in South America and Latin America than in the United States. Somehow we have allowed ourselves or been encouraged to not see the connection between those formerly enslaved and ourselves as formerly enslaved people. And that the future, from my point of view, has to be a capacity for us to recognize the similarity of our experiences, our situations, and the common denominator of the oppression that all of us are part of, the Ma'afa, the great transatlantic slave trade, and that our solution has to be moving back through time, through history, to an understanding of that allows us to create different systems of connectivity between and among us that are cultural, that are social, that are religious, and that are financial, that allow a different game or process or systems to emerge that benefit us. And not particularly to the detriment of anybody else. At the end of the day, when and as we develop our capabilities, we end up bringing something of a gift to all human beings, a system of sharing knowledge, power, of creating balance that does not exist in the hierarchical structure that we live with today. That's kind of my general thoughts. What do you think, Dr. Orr?
Well, let me just say this. I've studied the urban context for many years. And one of the things that I find very, very important when you're dealing with various groups within the urban context is how does one build and sustain broad-based coalitions to do the kind of things that's going to help not only one segment of the population, but the broader segment of the population. So for me, I see coalition building as being significant and important for progress. What that requires, I think, is grassroots involvement, civic associations, religious organizations that can bring the various groups together around shared values around home life, around jobs, and these kinds of things. That's how you break down the seemingly strong barriers that exist across communities. How does one bring together the notion of our shared community values that all of us have in all our communities? One of the things I've seen this happen is through community organizing, building local leadership, sustaining local leadership becomes very important. And as the national situation gets to be so difficult, it seems to me that working at the local and state level is going to become increasingly important. So building coalitions across our communities around shared values become a key component in advancing the community at large.
How do we
Speaking
discuss
my language, Dr. Orr.
how do we discuss disparate issues like two? One is this week we were notified of the death of Asada Shakur. What does that mean? How shall we be discussing that in our community? This week we're also inundated by the discussions led by the White House on Charlie Kirk. How do we, from within the Black community, continue to formulate and contextualize these events in ways that make sense to who we are and who we are becoming? What do you think? And Justin, jump in on this as well. But Dr. Orr, you first, Justin.
Yeah, I think creating the space for people to come together to express their concerns on venues like the one we have right now, the kind of civic organizations that you all are involved with that I've seen around becomes very important. So making the space for people to air and share their concerns become vitally important, especially when we are all very busy and doing things to keep our lives going. So how do we find the time to carve out the time to build shared space so we can express our concerns? I really believe strongly in the role of grassroots leadership to addressing our concerns.
Justin,
this is not my top area, but
Justin, what does justice look like?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot to respond to, but justice, as we focus on it at the Minnesota Justice Research Center, is fair practices and principles and policies, equitable division of resources, wealth at times, right? Accountable systems, accountable people, and seeking restoration whenever possible, which these are the guiding principles of our organization as we try to work to reimagine the criminal legal system. And Dr. Orr, I couldn't agree with you more than ever when you talk about grassroots organizing and developing leaders and sustaining those leaders, not developing activists, which we've gotten really good at, but developing leaders and sustaining those leaders. And I just think it would be wrong not to just sneak this in here around Asada. And just what she says is that it is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to win. We must love one another and support each other. We have nothing to lose but our chains. That right there, to me, summarizes what we're talking about in all of these issues today. Is that not only is it just our duty to fight, we are responsible to launch strategies that provide actual outcomes to our people. And that, yes, it is scary, but we have nothing to lose but our chains. If we don't fight, we know how bad things can and will get. And so I really appreciate this. Has been amazing, Elder. Thank you so much for inviting me to this conversation.
Well, thank you for being here. I want to close with Linda. Maybe you might, Dr. Orr, go ahead. The comment.
I was going to make an observation tying back to Congressman Diggs.
Yes.
One of the things that I uncovered about him is that he was a person who was very persistent. I mean, he hung in there. He persisted and he tried to push the boulders up the hill. He was one who, when you read and listen to his speeches, he was one who would not give up. He was a persistent fighter for freedom, despite the challenges that he and others like him confronted in the 50s and 1960s. So what I'm saying here is that we too must have that kind of persistence in these very difficult times. We just got to continue pushing.
We got to stop it right there. This is what a wonderful hour. Dr. Orr, thank you. All of my guests, thank you. Saturday, October 4th at the Thor Building on Plymouth and Penn, North Minneapolis, Bridging the Gap, Shared Roots, Diverse Journey. Thank you, Linda and team from the Council on Minnesotans of African Heritage. And thank you, Justin Terrell from the Minnesota Justice Research Center. I'm Al McFarlane. We'll see you next time.
Thank you. Thank you.